it. Nobody wants to say anything because you're rocking the boat, but the system just is not working at all. Most people that go on deputation, they never finish and they never go to the missions field. I believe the percentage was 60% that I read end up quitting before they go to the mission field because, you know,
did they already get the money? Like, I don't know how that works, but did they already raise some of that money?
I think it's in prospects. Like, I don't think the money was already sent to them, but it's like promised to them.
Yeah.
But
so they have pledges or something like that, and then since they didn't go, at least they didn't waste money.
Right.
But how are they paying for this traveling around the world? Like, because they're traveling all over the U.S., like, how are they paying for that?
It's either comes from churches that are generous. They might put you up in a hotel. Sometimes the missionaries have to pay for it themselves.
I see.
It's a very illogical system financially, and people don't like talking about finances as if it's just going to work itself out. But we need to be good stewards of money too. And, you know, instead of me traveling all over trying to get money to support me, you know, there are churches that are like-minded that have sent money because they know Pastor Jimenez, or you send out a missionary, evangelist, or bannock. People know based on the reputation of Steadfast Baptist Church, they already know a lot about him. They know what he believes and everything.
Yeah, I mean, we have an incredible online reputation. And so, you know, of course, that really helps us when you type in Steadfast into Google, like just 5 stars, everything like that. No, I want to comment on something before I want to let you finish, but, you know, obviously maybe we'd only met a few brief times, but at the same time, I'd had a lot of people go out to the Philippines, go soul winning with you or with your church. Also, you were giving newsletters about the progress that you were having over there. I watched some of your videos. You had pictures, of course, of some of your soul winning events. I know that we used to have kind of like a big worldwide kind of soul winning event where we would talk about like having like the mega marathon. And I was always, you know, impressed by the numbers that would come from your part of the world and some of the work that you guys were doing. And so it wasn't just like, yeah, just one guy told me this is a good guy and I'm just like, let's go for it. Obviously, there's a lot of information, a lot of research, a lot of people's testimony, you know, to verify these kind of things. But for many missionaries, there isn't such a thing. You know, it's this guy over in Zimbabwe or whatever, and there is no, like, half of my church has gone over there, and here's all the newsletters, here's all the pictures of their soul winning efforts. Like, you know, there isn't a lot of tangible stuff. You're really kind of taking a leap of faith, in my mind, kind of blind faith. Plus, even if you just read their own newsletters, they're not saying, like, we're getting all these people saved or whatever. It's just like, we cleaned the house and I finally learned how to say hello in the language. And, you know, it's like, hopefully I'll learn how to say cup next week or something. It's just like, you know, it's pretty evident there's a difference between Pastor Stuckey and what Verity Baptist Church is doing and what many other missionaries and mission programs are doing. And, you know, you should know a tree by its fruit. So I think that you can see a lot of the fruit from y'all's ministry. And I'm glad that I actually got to go out there and personally experience it, see what it's like. Because you never really know what something's like until you go out there. And, you know, I didn't want to send an evangelist out there myself, our evangelist or Bannock out there, without having ever been there or seeing it or kind of experienced what some of the soul winning's like. And again, I have such a very limited knowledge of the area still, but I think at least gave me some idea of what's kind of going on, what to expect, what is realistic, what's not realistic, and that I never want to drive anytime I'm ever in Manila. But
yeah, traffic's crazy.
Yeah, I totally.
Let me just mention. Well, go ahead.
Sorry. No, go ahead.
Let me just mention one other aspect of deputation I think a lot of people are not familiar with. It's called furlough. And so this is a term you might hear in the secular world, but in terms of with deputation, if you're getting a lot of support from a bunch of churches, a small amount, eventually you have to go there and visit them.
Right.
You know? And so basically, you know, you've been on the foreign field for a long time, so then once every 15 years you go back to the U.S., and you're kind of doing deputation part two because you've lost some support. Churches have closed, so you're going around to new churches, going back to the ones that you know. And basically you're going to be gone from the church that you are running for 6 months, 8 months,
maybe a year.
Now, I understand the need to go and report to your sending church. And of course, I visited Very Baptist Church a couple times. Obviously, it was hard during COVID, but I've been back a few times since I've been out here. But I don't have to visit 100 churches because I'm being supported by Verity Baptist Church.
Right.
So that's another problem with deputation.
Well, and again, I could kind of understand or see if, and I've heard this from some missionaries. They're going to areas that are just very unreached. Perhaps the language is just so obscure or so different that it's almost impossible to learn from abroad or learn from afar. They really do kind of have to submerge themselves in that environment, and the goal is to try and learn the language to then give them the gospel. I guess I could see how in some cases it may be kind of a long-term project or may not be very fruitful in the initial stages. But at the same time, like my view is if I only got so much time on this earth, like it almost makes more sense to just try and reach all the people that I can right now in the language that I have and going out there. But people that are trying to learn languages that you can learn from abroad, to me, I just don't see it. I feel like you gotta put in the work here stateside. Go soul winning here, learn the language from here if you really have that zeal, and then go over there. I don't think it makes sense sending someone over to these crazy, destinations and they're just trying to learn language for 6-7 years before they can even give the gospel to somebody. I mean, how long would it take for me to learn Arabic, Ben? Could I even do it?
I think you could, but it would take a while. It would take years before you could get to a stage where you can give the gospel. Going out before learning the language is almost like putting the cart before the horse.
Well, and I wouldn't even know how receptive it is. I mean, I could think like, in my mind, this is going to be so receptive. Learn Arabic for 5 years or something, and then realize they're not even receptive. And then it's just kind of been a big waste.
Yeah, that's very true.
Of effort there. And according to Pastor Stuckey's statistic, I might even quit. I'm 60% chance likely I'm going to quit before I even go over there, let alone I don't even know what the success rate is of people that go over there. Like how many people quit after going too? Like maybe through difficulty or,
probably,
not enjoying it.
Probably
yeah. But I want to play another clip. We have another clip here of some, in my mind, misconceptions about missions. Let's see if we can play clip 2 here and let's get some more thoughts.
This week, we have an amazing volunteer team from Transformation Church, and we're here in Tanzania. My name is Jennifer Crawford, and I am one of the co-founders for Asking for the Nations, and we have spent the last 3 days volunteering at a free medical clinic. Also, we are building 2 new classrooms.
For what?
So we've been out here early this morning, and we're just right now stacking these blocks in place. So when they go ahead and start building the walls, they have the materials right then and there to just expedite the building process.
We're laying the foundation. I'm excited.
We had said we're starting a vocational school, and the minute we mentioned school, we had police officers coming to us, we had neighbors coming to us, we had pastors coming to us saying we need an English medium primary school right here in this area.
5 years ago when I came, none of this was here. Now getting to see all of this 5 years later is just unexplainable.
Yes, this is a school, but it's still God's house. Children learn here, and it is going to continue on for generations and generations to come.
People in Tanzania do not have access to free medical care. It was an amazing clinic, over 600 patients in 3 days.
Okay, so let me bring you into our medical clinic. Definitely not your Western medicine experience.
10 kg. 10 to 21.
Okay.
Everybody is lined up, person after person after person. Where are people that need to be seen right now? Where are people supposed to be going? Where are
you
people
ever been to the ER?
Aren't where they're supposed to be? I had to carry a man.
Wow. You can kill it. What, have you ever been to the hospital and there was no one there, Ben? I guess only during COVID when we were having just an explosion of people at the hospital and all the doctors were dancing to TikTok videos. I mean, what in the world? Do you have a free medical care, Ben?
No, I don't.
Well, we need to send some missionaries to build you a clinic so you can have free medical
DFW.
care.
We need missionaries here in DFW, apparently.
Yeah. I didn't realize that public school was God's house now.
It's a fundamental difference in what we mean by missions and what they mean. I think it's just that simple. One is based purely on that which is carnal, whereas what we try to do is benefit people spiritually.
It doesn't even seem very efficient. Like, how many American people are good at building buildings? Like, I mean, how many people? How many people are literally in construction?
Not to be sexist, but I just don't think the ladies are going to be that effective with the building work either,
Right, like let's get a bunch of random white chicks and whatever to just go and build these concrete structures. Like, what do they even know about
Maybe
that?
It was just for the camera, and then when they got off camera,
Jorge and
Pedro ended up taking over.
Well, at least it would finally make sense. Like, if we're going to send somebody to build a house, wouldn't we be like, all right, we know who we're going to pick. We decided we're going to pick Jorge and Jose and Pedro. Like, we're not going to send Shaniqua. Like, hey, let's get Shaniqua over there to build some kind of a school or whatever. Like, how does that even make sense?
I just don't see the difference between this transformation church trip and secular organizations that go out and do these things. And you have philanthropists who give money to poor countries and people, and they have this, you have different foundations going and do, what's the difference? It's like they're doing the same thing, except one is just maybe mildly Christian.
We have another clip. Let's see if we can get the third clip of, I want to show a little bit of this video from YouTube of Mr. Beast. So Mr. Beast, I think he maybe claimed he was Christian at first, but like he's not really making Christian content. He's not like trying to be a Christian or something like that. But he went to Africa and he has a pretty popular video, like a big video, where they built 100 wells. That was like their big thing over in Africa. Let's play just a little bit of this clip. We can react to it as it plays.
This is the first of 100 wells we're going to build in this video. Oh, water! You just witnessed a small village in Kenya get access to unlimited clean drinking water in less than a second. One down, 99 more wells in Africa to go. You're going to love this video. Combined, these 100 wells are going to give around 500,000 people fresh water to drink. And after building some more wells on this side of Kenya, we flew south to the school system of Nairiri. And let's just say they were really happy to see us. How's it going? Not expecting this.
I was not expecting this, as we have aerial footage of a drone flying with all these people stacked up in a line.
This village threw a welcome ceremony upon our arrival.
Something tells me he was lying.
Got really into it. No one's the most awkward person I've ever met.
I mean, can't you just see just putting some Christian music undertones on this?
And
like,
then it's virtually identical to Transformation Church, the video we just watched a few minutes ago.
From this river that's extremely unsafe to drink. This is where your students used to get water from?
Yes.
This is crazy.
Yeah. Students complaining of diarrhea, infections like typhoid, because this is the water we've been using. So we try to treat, but you see, look at it, but at the end of the day, life has to move on. You have to get some water anyway.
This situation is obviously extremely sad. These children's lives are being limited and sometimes cut short.
Just the sad music. Look at that kid's face. He's so sad.
But at least for this village,
I'm sure Mr. Beast really cares
right now. I don't think
he's not just doing this for views.
Let's see if we can find some water.
I mean, this looks cool.
And again, I mean, if people want to go do this kind of thing, I'm not going to condemn them for it. I'm just saying.
Water comes out of the ground.
Yeah, we
need to redefine what missions work actually is. Is it going and giving people the gospel and benefiting them spiritually, or is it building a school?
Building. I mean, again, how many wells has Pastor Stuckey? How many wells have you built?
I'm not that good with construction, so.
See, this guy's not even a real missionary. I mean, he's been over there for years, and he hasn't even built a single well. I mean,
out there in the Philippines.
How many schools have you built?
Yeah, so far none. We're working on it. But.
Pastor Stuckey, we know you might not have built any wells or schools, and you said you're working on it, so we'll see what happens there. But Pastor Stuckey, one thing we do know about you is that you've pissed off some false prophets out there, so at least you have that badge of honor, right?
Yeah, that has happened. We've started to run into some persecution. We just had somebody created, it's definitely someone we kicked out of church. I can't know for sure. But someone who created a YouTube channel just to start attacking us. So that's kind of a recent thing.
I wonder what that's like.
We
wouldn't know anything about that.
Yeah, you would not know at all, would you, right?
Is it because you didn't make enough wells? Is that the problem? Like you just aren't giving people water or something like that? I mean, here's the thing. Obviously, there's nothing wrong with giving people water or building wells. Obviously, people in the Bible built wells.
Yeah, they're helping the poor.
Obviously, there's nothing wrong with even giving housing or something like that. But is there not just like an obvious like similarity between Mr. Beast's video and then these other missionary videos? Whereas, what is the difference here?
What do you think, Pastor Stuckey?
Well, here's the thing. What's the root problem in these countries that are really poor? I don't believe it's a physical problem. If you want to get to the root of the matter, I believe it's a spiritual problem. You look at, I remember seeing a statistic a long time ago that the country of India has the highest percentage of arable land of any country in the world, and yet they've been gaining in wealth recently, but they've been a poor country for a long time because of their false religion, because they don't eat the cow meat, they let the mice and the rats eat up all their grains. It's not a physical problem, it's a spiritual problem. And, Pastor Mendez, I listened to one of his sermons recently, and he was talking about where like a devil will leave a body and come back and bring 7 more, and the last state of the man is worse than the first. And he was talking about the importance of the spiritual change and not the physical, because you have organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm not necessarily saying it's a bad organization. I don't know much about it, but that doesn't make the long-lasting change in someone. The long-lasting change comes when people are going to church and hearing the Word of God, and that's how you're making long changes to your life. And so I think if we want to make long-lasting changes to this country, it's not a physical problem. Silver and gold have I none, but such as I have I give thee, right? It's a spiritual problem, which is what we should be hitting at.
Oh, that's
and again, are we going to feed people fish, or we want to give them the gospel? We want to give them doctrine. We want to give them things that are spiritual that actually matter. Because, if these people actually had the gospel and learned the Bible, they could build their own wells. Like do they really need Shaniqua to come over there and build them huts and wells and stuff? Now, I want to keep going, but I also want to offer to our audience, if you've been listening and you want to call in, our phone line is open, 231 Baptist. You can ask Pastor Stuckey a question live on air, or if you'd like to share a testimony about maybe a mission experience that you've had or something that you've experienced or seen. I know that I've had a lot of different experiences with talking with different individuals who've gone on a missions trip. I wish I was thinking on my phone, I had like a voice recording of somebody, but there was this one missionary somewhere in Germany, I believe it was, and specifically they wanted me to give them money, and I was kind of asking him about salvation. Like I wanted to kind of check, and he was giving me some weird answers, and then all of a sudden he's just like, do you believe in the pre-trib rapture? Just like out of nowhere, just like the conversation, nothing even, and it was just like, I said, well, that's not really a test of fellowship for me or anything. Like, I care more about the gospel. And he was like, do you believe the pre-trib rapture? And I was like, well, honestly, no. And then he's just like, I got to go. And then he just hung up on me after, like he just wanted to know where I was in end times.
What a loser.
And, it's kind of crazy that he didn't want my money if I didn't believe in the pre-trib rapture. But even when we talk about building these houses and wells, I know my wife, she went on one of these mission trips when she was younger. And I think that they were building roofs, or I could be remembering incorrectly, but she was part of one of these where they're building stuff. But she told me, like, she would go out and she would talk to the kids, invite them to church, and she even tried to give the gospel to them. And she did give the gospel to one young girl, and she prayed with her. And, it seemed like a successful, like, opportunity, like, get someone saved and everything like that. But then I remember my wife was saying, like, afterwards, when she's talking to this girl, this little girl kind of indicated like maybe that this had happened before, and my wife then kind of asked her about it, and she's like, "Oh yeah, I get saved every year whenever the missionaries come here, and they just kind of like are going through the motions
so not
and
understanding what's happening."
I'm glad that it didn't discourage my wife from wanting to still be a soul winner and preach the gospel later in life and everything like that, but you kind of have to wonder, like, how well are these people doing at any of these jobs? Like, are they going into it? They're not a construction expert, and if they're not necessarily even a soul winning expert, it's like you're just taking people on glorified vacations. Like, what is the goal here?
Well, there's a few comments in the chat I wanted to share and then get your guys' reaction to. The first one, Valiant Armory, says, "Man, this topic is really fire. My mom spent something like $2,000 plus to go to Mexico with a church from Alaska to build a shed-sized house for someone the whole time they weren't allowed to talk to anyone." So that kind of goes along with what we've been
their name is
describing.
Valiant Armory. I don't know what you said.
What did I say?
I don't know. I don't think you said that.
Did I say something
When
else?
I heard Valiant, I was just like, oh, no, I'm just kidding.
Sorry about that if I botched your name. Another comment, and I want to get your guys' reaction to this specifically. It says right here, this is Beans and Taters. "I understand what you all are saying, but at the same time, I don't think there's anything wrong with helping meet people's physical needs in addition to their spiritual ones. Not all areas and communities have access to secular organizations to come and do these things. You can meet both the physical and spiritual needs." That's the gist of it. What are you guys' reaction to that? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with meeting physical needs necessarily. It's just that there's no spiritual needs being met whatsoever. What do you think?
Well, again, I think what we're trying to distinguish here is the difference between doing good and being a missionary. The Apostle Paul was not going out there and meeting people's physical needs. Like, it's just really just a fact. He was going out there and trying to meet their spiritual needs, because there's a lot of ways that physical needs can be met, and I'm not against them. The Bible brings them up. The Bible says to remember the poor. There's nothing wrong with feeding people. Jesus cared about people's physical needs. Obviously, even the Lord's Prayer, we're thanking the Lord for our daily bread. But at the end of the day, a missionary, his goal is to preach the gospel. His goal is to come out there and meet spiritual needs, because no one, Mr. Beast is not going to meet your spiritual needs. Mr. Beast could show up, like, he's not even preaching the gospel. He could show up and meet your physical needs. God could send someone to meet your physical needs that's not even saved. But, the person that is the most important is the one that's going to come and meet your spiritual need, making sure that you're on your way to heaven, and trying to get you zealous for the things of God, reading the Bible. And so, there's a lot of ways that people's physical needs could be met in Manila that are not Pastor Stuckey. But what Pastor Stuckey brings to the table is he's a spiritual giant. He's a zealous man of God, and he's on fire for the Lord, and he can bring the gospel. He can bring baptism. He can bring church. He can bring the right Bible, and he can bring a lot of great doctrines. From your perspective, Pastor Stuckey, I mean, is physical needs really on the radar of y'all's missions program? I mean, maybe correct me if I'm wrong here, but it seems like it's not necessarily the highest priority.
Right. I agree with everything you said. And another thing I'd like to add is, and I'm sure you're the same way, sometimes you have members at church that are good people and they're struggling financially. And our church has helped members out before that are going through a rough time. And, my standard of giving money is to give it to those that are godly. The Bible speaks about, in the context of reaping what you sow, in a good way, remembering the household of faith. So above anything is remembering those that are saved and helping them out. So, for me, if someone's unsaved, I want to give them the gospel. But if someone is a member of a church and they're a good person, they fall in rough times and they're not trying to use the church, they just are struggling. We have helped out people. But I do believe in the Bible you see the principle of helping out those that are godly and not just, any random person. And, earlier you were mentioning about the country of Haiti, Brother Ben, and you think about like the earthquakes that have been sent to Haiti, and this might be offensive to people, but it's like, yeah, that was the wrath of God that was poured out. And so when you're pouring in all this money to try to like undo the wrath of God, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Obviously the problem with a country like that is a spiritual problem, not a physical. So yeah, I'm not against helping people physically or financially, but I would definitely be veering toward those that are godly people above just random people. Because I have people that ask me for money all the time as an American in the Philippines. And if I gave money to every single person, then I'd have to start begging for money, to be honest. So,
yeah, and you kind of wonder, I mean, how much of this money going to Haiti is just funneling through to nefarious people? Is it really going to actually help anybody? Like, what percentage? Now, we do have a caller, so I want to try and go to our caller here. We have Brother Ken on the phone. Brother Ken, can you hear us?
How's it going?
Hey, how's it going?
Yeah, how's it going?
Yeah, you might be. You're a little bit quiet. I don't know if we can turn you up or maybe speak into the speaker a little bit louder. I want to make sure everybody can hear you loud and clear.
Is that better?
Yeah, that's way better. Okay. Brother Ken, where are you from?
I'm from Alaska.
Oh man, that's out there.
So I got a funny story about these missions trips. You guys kind of talked about it a little bit when I posted in the chat, but basically my mom spent thousands of dollars to go on this Mexico missions trip. And they got to the airport in Mexico. They were loaded onto a bus by private security. They were taken to a hotel. They were instructed not to leave the hotel until security picked them up again. They were loaded back up on the bus, taken to a job site, offloaded by private security. No one from Mexico was there at the job site. They then built this kind of like lean-to shed, and the whole crew was pretty much exactly what you would think. It was like a collection of sodomites and multi-haired feminists and just, a collection of the worst people you can imagine. And my mom just has pictures of her, writing on the walls. So she wasn't even helping, literally just like writing Bible verses and, on the walls, and then they painted over them, And then she got loaded back on a bus and taken to a hotel and sent home. At the end of it all, mission accomplished. Never got to speak to a single person in Mexico, never shared the gospel with anybody. And it's like, there goes a couple $1,000 of Lord's money.
Well, it's almost like we want to make these people poor, because it's not like people from Mexico don't know how to build things. They literally build everything in America. I mean, have you ever been to America? They're coming over here and they're building our skyscrapers and building these giant commercial buildings and the houses over here. And then we go over there and build them like a tin hut that could be blown over by the big bad wolf. Like, is that not insane? Like, we go over there and show them how not to build, and then they come over here and literally build all of our structures. It's almost like an oxymoron if you think about it.
We had friends that went to Africa as like medical missionaries, and they spent 2 years in, I think it was like Nambia, and they didn't share the gospel to a single person after 2 years of living in the country. But I mean, they did a lot of medical stuff.
Have you ever been to Mexico, brothers or Pastor Tucky?
Yeah, I went actually with Pastor Anderson a really long time ago, but it was like a half a day trip. At the time, I didn't speak Spanish. It was more for just entertainment.
Yeah. Do you think they need some more like metal roof buildings over there or anything? Like they're really hurting for those, or what?
I'm sure they know more about it than the average, American, right? It's like, obviously, if you live in a country and there's something that's in need, then people become proficient in how to do it.
Right.
So it doesn't really make a lot of logical sense, like I'm by trade, I was in college, I got a math degree. It's like, what would I know about the things that they deal with if I had no experience whatsoever? So.
Yeah, that's just crazy. And again, obviously a lot of women are not really in the construction industry. It's kind of crazy to just transport them over to Mexico to build some random structure.
I don't know what you're talking about. My wife constructs some pretty good sandwiches.
Well, I'm sorry. I didn't think about that. What about Mexican sandwiches?
No.
American
style.
Oh, American.
Sorry, yeah. PB&J. I like PB&J as well.
Well, maybe they can send some white women over to Mexico to construct some sandwiches then, right?
There we go. Yep.
I mean, at least we're bringing our expertise over there now, finally.
I would like to say this, though, before I really knew how to go soul winning like a structured way, the way I became a lot better at soul winning was the soul winning demonstration between Pastor Anderson and Pastor Berzins, long before he was a pastor. And I had been trying to preach the gospel for several years. And I was already an independent fundamental Baptist, but I didn't really, have that at the church that I went to. So I was watching videos online and reading articles and all this information. And my goal was to get 2 people saved in my life, because I figured I could not just replace myself, but then double the amount. And, I think there's a lot of people that go on some of these missions trips and they don't really know about soul winning or how to do it properly. And they really do think that they're doing a good work. It's not that they're, just doing it to be seen of man. I mean, that's definitely true in some cases. But I think a lot of people, they just don't know, what real soul winning is. They just haven't experienced that. They haven't been in a church that's really been pushing soul winning. And I think in the past, missions were probably a lot better than now. I think they used to be a lot more zealous for preaching the gospel, whereas now I think the deal has really kind of died out in these churches.
It seems like it's now just a propaganda scheme to just keep raising money. And I'm not really taking fault for a lot of the people going on these trips. Like Brother Ken said, I don't think his mom had bad intentions. I don't think she even knew what she was getting into exactly. I think it was more just the organizations and these programs that people just keep funneling all their money towards. And I think hopefully the goal of this program is to wake some people up to say, stop funneling money to these programs that don't really make any sense. Like if you're going to send some dollars anywhere, send them to Pastor Stuckey, send them to a real missionary, to a real church, Verity Baptist Church, Manila, and, or other evangelists, or, if you're going to have some money to do something yourself, do it yourself. Missions trip makes a lot of sense. I think we still have Brother Ken on the line. Do you have any questions for us before we let you go? Thanks for the call. I like your story. Do you have a question or anything before we move on?
No, just to say, praise God for you guys. I feel like my money is getting used as a maximum investment for God. So,
thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much for calling in.
Thanks, Ken.
God bless you, Brother Ken. And again, the phone lines are open. If anybody else wants to call in, 231-BAPTIST. We're taking call-ins if you want to ask a question. If you would like to share a story with us, we'd like to hear that.
I had a question for the both of you. We've talked a lot about what mission trips shouldn't be and where people are going wrong.
Yeah, don't build McDonald's over foreign seas. Yeah.
Well, I was actually hoping that maybe we can go in that direction. But anyway, my point is, what is the Baptist bias on mission trips? What should they be like? What are the attributes of a biblical mission trip in your mind? And this is for both of you. And I know it might take a while to explain, but just give the high-level basics here. What are the attributes of a biblical mission trip, in your opinion?
Well, I don't think that you would say – I could say that any missions trip is supposed to just be exactly one specific cookie-cutter model. I think that there's going to be different style missions trips based on the location, based on the amount of time, based on the people that are there. Obviously, if it's your first trip somewhere that's very underreached with the gospel, you probably need to focus on the gospel. Obviously, if you've been getting a lot of people saved and you're revisiting an area, maybe then you focus in on baptism, getting churches started, or pointing people to church. Obviously, with Pastor Stuckey at his level, they're going to be doing much more than just evangelism or just preaching the gospel. Doing discipleship, trying to get people zealous in their church and learning doctrine. And so I think it's just, looking at the Apostle Paul, looking at his example, and looking at the different stages he went through in his missions trips and following that same example. His initial missions trips, he's just going out and just basically just preaching the gospel everywhere he can. He didn't even get a lot of very many people baptized. He makes that a mention in the New Testament that he wasn't baptizing a ton of people. And then when he would revisit, now he's not revisiting just general population areas. He's revisiting churches specifically. So he's going to churches. He's encouraging the brethren. He's trying to train up other soul winners. He's trying to get evangelists ordained. He's trying to get pastors ordained, bishops ordained, deacons ordained. He's trying to encourage the brethren. So I think obviously the mission trip is going to evolve over time depending on the work that's done. But what we don't see consistently is the Apostle Paul building schools, wells, and just glorified building projects. He's really building the church, which is people, not even the building. We don't even have a mention of them building buildings. We don't know if they met in just houses most of the time, or if they were borrowing or renting buildings, or I don't know exactly what all the different church structures were like in the early church. We know at least some were meeting in houses. We know that was a certainty, but it's not about physical buildings and physical projects. It's about spiritual projects. And I want people to get the right idea of what missions should really look like. We sent out an evangelist to the Philippines to help with Pastor Stuckey and just to help reach this vision of getting people saved. And, I'm not looking for our evangelist to start building stuff, become a construction expert, or to, learn how to, build a well or something like that. I want him to get people saved, get them baptized, get them plugged into church, help build churches, get people zealous for the things of God. I don't know if I'm leaving out maybe something obvious or something else you think of that would be a definition of a mission trip here, Pastor Stuckey.
For the mission trips we've done, like we did, we've had the one in Manila. It was kind of on hold for several years with COVID. We're going to be doing one in less than 3 months in Cebu. We're going to be partnering with Pastor Sammy Mansili at Faith and Verity Baptist Church. They're like-minded on doctrines. They'd say they're a new IFB church. I've never met them in person, but I know a lot of people from our church that have visited there. They're doing a lot of soul winning. Next year, we're planning not just the mission trip in Manila, but also in Bicol, which is near our church there. And what we focus on in these missions trips, I personally like working with other churches if that's possible. I don't think that's the only way you can do it. It's just nice to be able to do both, help out the church and also, do a missions trip. But we really try to focus on the parks because, if we had the missions trip and it was all door to door, we would still get people saved. But the truth is you're going to start running into some language barriers. You can't be as selective as who you talk to. So for my mind in the future, I would love to have a lot of missions trips. Obviously we're not there now, but I'd love to have a lot of missions trips here in the Philippines at different locations. My idea is really focusing on areas where they have big parks, where they'd have a lot of people meeting. So it wouldn't be, door to door. Obviously door to door soul winning is great, and we do that. But obviously, Pastor Shelley, from visiting at the parks, there's so many people. It's just a much more effective way if your number one goal is to get people saved.
Yeah, and I think that's important to think about the people that are there. I really try to emphasize, even on some of our missions trips, to have fun. Yes. so that people will want to come back. Because to me, what I don't want is an experience like Brother Ken was talking about with his mother, where she went on one missions trip. It was like, I went on the mission trip, and it's like, I don't want to go on that again. Or, for people to walk away and just maybe not have enjoyed themselves. I want maximum enjoyment experience. And I think also, when you're talking about a country like the Philippines, people may have an expectation, especially from some testimonies, that it's a pretty receptive area. So if you did take them to maybe some of the less receptive areas, or weren't giving them a great opportunity to get a lot of soul winning in, they may kind of feel disappointed or maybe bummed out. So I could see why you want to go to parks and things like that. I really enjoyed, we got to go to some parks and do a lot of soul winning where there's just a litany of people. I mean, just thousands of people out and about, walking around. Virtually, you can't run out of people. And it was fun. It was fun to get to just talk to tons of people and be able to give the gospel over and over again and try to get a lot of people saved. But, when it comes to a missions trip, I think that there's going to be a lot of differences. And I think that we want to make sure that, to me, that we're helping the people that are coming out there with what they need the most. And I want them to stay zealous. And you've gone on a few missions trips, or at least one, to the Bahamas, Brother Ben. Was that like a really big drag? Did you really hate it? I mean, what was your feeling there?
It was one of the greatest trips I've ever been on in my life. And you brought up the importance of having fun. And you enabled us to do that. We did a lot of great fellowship activities and had a great time. It was the time of my life, and I made memories I'll never forget on that trip. But in addition to having fun, we also did a lot of work. We did a lot of soul winning. And one other aspect I wanted to add, because you both described biblical mission trips and what they should look like and some of the attributes you look for in a trip. But one other thing I want to add is just getting a chance to go to the public schools and preaching to hundreds of kids and talking to them and giving them the gospel, in some cases one-on-one, in other cases actually speaking to an entire classroom, and getting the chance to do that at our mission trip to the Bahamas, courtesy of Steadfast Baptist Church, was powerful. It was an immense impact that we were able to make on those schools to get those people the gospel.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. We got a great open door to preach to a lot of schools, and I feel like I've seen pictures of you guys also getting some opportunities. Have y'all been able to get into a lot of schools and preach the gospel to a lot of the students?
Yeah, we have, but honestly, it's a lot more strict now. It's really hard to get into the schools. We were able to set up just a little bit during the missions trip, but here in Pampanga where we are, we've been turned down from basically every school that we went to. They just have new rules, I think not just after COVID, but with our new vice president that's kind of in charge of the education department. They're very strict against it. Also in Metro Manila, most areas turn us down. We found most of the principals here are homosexuals, so obviously they're not for what we're doing. And so, but you wonder, why are there so many LGBT in the Philippines? Why is it so prominent? And, that's one of the reasons. My wife used to be a teacher in the Philippines a while back, and her principal was a homo, where she was a teacher. And so there used to be more opportunities. They seem more strict now. We're hoping that they'll be less strict in the future. It's hard to see. Those are definitely awesome opportunities. They're very exciting, too.
Is this a lot of dykes, or are you talking about male homosexuals?
Dogs or pigs?
Dogs.
Oh, really?
Dogs.
Wow, a lot of dogs. That's gross. I can see how there's a lot of pigs because, over in America, a lot of the teachers and principals are female here. And it's kind of confusing to Americans because you would think of going to a school to preach the gospel, no one's allowed to do that. But that's just because you have this weird American mindset. But a lot of foreign countries, especially, in times past, are very open to evangelists and missionaries coming into their schools directly and preaching the Bible. I know in the Bahamas we had a great opportunity. I don't know how long of an open door that will be. So you always want to take advantage of those opportunities. Like you said, it's kind of changed a little bit where you're at, and maybe God willing, he'll change that back. But it's just kind of frustrating to see the influence of these reprobates in schools, and they're of course propagandizing and evangelizing their doctrine and trying to teach what they believe about everything. And it'd be nice if we had some Christians that would have the boldness and the character to be willing to preach what we believe, which is the most important truth out there. Now, I do have someone asked a question, and it's a very serious question that I want to ask you, Pastor Stuckey. It's, do you miss American food?
Honestly, not that much. My wife misses American food more than me. My wife's more into steak and burgers than me, so
man.
There are things that are better in the Philippines and things that are worse. So kind of I'm very much into fruit, and there are a lot of fruits that grow much better here in the Philippines than they would in the U.S. But, berries don't grow very well here. Apples don't grow as well, at least as they did in West Virginia,
Well, I feel like
area.
Monsanto's got better fruit, I mean, they grow it in the lab over here a lot better. No, when I was over there, they had some interesting fruits. Don't they have yellow watermelon?
Yeah, they have a lot of things that are unique. Sometimes people ask me, "What's the word for this in English?" I'm like, I don't even know what that is. What are you talking about?
Yeah,
so we don't have that in America. So,
Trade Selector in the chat room says that he's been to Hawaii and the Philippines, and the Philippines definitely has the better beaches. He says some of the best in the world. Google Boracay and Palwan.
I'm sure that's exactly how you pronounce those two beaches.
Boracay and Palawan.
I was close.
At first, it took me a second. I'm like, what did he say? No,
it's like a weird Arabic
American.
I got it close, all right?
I don't know what accent that is.
That was super close. What do you think? Can you corroborate that one, Pastor Stuckey?
So I've never been to those two specific areas. There's one I've been to, Subic Bay, that is really nice. What I like about it is probably less crowded. When I grew up, everyone would go to Ocean City when I was a kid. and it would always be crowded. So, I kind of like Subic Bay. I've never been to those places, though. I'm sure they are nice. The one thing I'll say is that when people come for the missions trip to Metro Manila, I feel bad because people get this idea this is what all of the Philippines is like. It's like, no, this is San Francisco. It's New York City. It's not. There's a lot of nice areas in the Philippines.
There's a lot of Jews in Manila?
Not that many. I do have a story about one. The one Filipino Jew that we ran into, he was mocking the death of Jesus while someone was preaching the gospel. He's like, oh, I'm in pain, Oh, I'm Jesus. Ouch, ouch. While someone was preaching the gospel. That's my only experience.
I thought that Jews loved the Bible. And they love Jesus.
It must have been an exception. There's a lot of exceptions to that rule when it comes to the Jews, it seems like.
Interesting.
It's disgusting.
What is it with Jews living in the most crowded, disgusting cities all over the world that just isn't, that are with LGBT stuff going on? I don't know if they're, how does that make sense?
Yeah, they just have a lot of power.
What about the language barrier?
To a YouTube strike. We got the big YouTube strike we got is when I preached on Purim from the book of Esther, and I just talked about how they celebrate it. It's like YouTube strike. I didn't even say anything offensive. I was just like, this is how they celebrate it. Read from articles. YouTube strike.
Is there a big language barrier out there, Pastor Stuckey? I won't try and pronounce the name of the language so that I don't get
Tagalog.
Heat. There we go. What is it there?
Go ahead and tell me what language did I
thought
say?
It was Tagalog, so I apologize if that's not the way to say it. But go ahead, Pastor Stuckey.
So it depends on where you live. The younger generation, they are taught in English in schools, like the subjects, the books, even for like whatever subject are in English. If you go to college, you have to have a strong English background. So with the younger generations, it's going to be rare for people that aren't very good at English. For the older generations, you'll run into some people that are not as good. And in some of the more countryside areas, they're not going to necessarily be as good. But one thing that's interesting in the Philippines, people speak very good English, but their perception of their ability is in a very humble way. So a lot of people would say they don't really speak English, when in reality they are fluent. It's just they have a humble view of themselves. So for soul winners, you really should go with confidence as you're talking to people, because people could get this idea they're a bit hesitant or a bit shy, like, oh, they don't speak English, when in reality, usually they do. You just have to be kind of bold and not show any fear and just confident and make them realize it's normal. But where we are, there's not really much of a language barrier in Manila and Pampanga. I preach all the sermons in English. I do preach the gospel in Tagalog, especially if they have more problems with English. But usually what I find is I start in Tagalog, and then during the conversation, I just switch to English because they're completely comfortable. And so from my experience where I am, there's not much of a language barrier, but I'm sure there are in some areas.
So they probably speak English better than Ben, is what basically the gist that I'm getting.
The Philippines is a very pro-America country. So they listen to the music, movies, and all of that stuff.
So they like Joe Biden or what?
Wait, what's that?
Do they like Joe Biden?
I don't know if they like Joe Biden. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if they would or not. Probably more Donald Trump, I would think.
What about, like, obviously there's a lot of LGBT people over there. What about the general populace, though? Do they have a favorable view towards those people, or do they dislike them, or are they just kind of like neutral? Like, what is kind of like their viewpoint?
So the most in-depth statistics I've seen in comparison to other countries is that the Philippines is the third most pro-LGBT country in Asia, number one being Taiwan, number two Thailand, and it would often chart in the top 10 most pro-LGBT countries. But it's not just because of this modern generation. If you look at the history, the roots of the Philippines, it's a very pro-feminist, pro-LGBT country. So, for example, in the language, siya or siya is the word for he, and it's the word for she. They don't have a distinction between male and female because they don't want to be offensive when the language was actually came out. And so gender neutral pronouns are here. But it's kind of like countries often never really go away from their roots. And a lot of people are saying we got to bring back the old Filipino culture where the natives were running things. And actually the homosexuals were the spiritual leaders in the Philippines if you go way back before Ferdinand Magellan and Catholicism came in. And so I preached a sermon on that before and went through really the history of the Philippines. But the Philippines is one of the most pro-LGBT countries in Asia. Probably right there in the top 3.
And is that like kind of your experience when you're actually talking with people? That's kind of like, obviously, you never always trust the media and statistics, but I'm just kind of curious, like when you're talking to people out in the streets and stuff, do they have a pretty neutral vibe, or are they against it? What's your view?
I would say the older generation would be more against it, but with the younger generation, you go to these parks, you talk to a group of 5 people, there will often be a homo in the midst, which makes it a very awkward conversation. And so that's something you just have to deal with because you're trying to preach to those that are interested, and sometimes they destroy the conversation. Sometimes you can work through it. But there's a guy here who's very popular on TV. His name is Vice Ganda. I call him Vice Pangit because Ganda is for beautiful, Pangit is ugly. But it's this cross-dressing guy, and he's always on the TV, the billboards. He's everywhere. And this younger generation, cross-dressers are always popping up on billboards and on YouTube. So it's getting a lot worse here. I think it's worse here than in the U.S., at least in terms of people openly like cross-dressing. So, it's something you got to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely makes sense just from my limited experience there, just that there's a ton of those people out and most people are hanging out with them, friends or friendly, or that it's definitely not necessarily that taboo. It seems like, and again, maybe you could correct me if I'm wrong, but it almost seems like the culture over there is a little bit immature, generally speaking, and maybe just a little bit kind of effeminate, like maybe just a little bit weaker. Like the men aren't necessarily encouraged to exude a lot of manliness or masculinity. And so there's kind of a little bit of androgyny when it comes to the clothing. Now, again, obviously there's exceptions when we talk about people at your church. Your church is definitely different. I'm just saying the general populace, it seems like the culture is a little bit maybe emasculated, maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I'd say that's with Asia I'd say that's with Asia in general.
Okay.
K-pop or Korean pop music is catching on, and they have that in some of the other countries as well. And so I'd say in Asia especially, obviously Asia's not that any continent is godly, but when you look at the crazy religions that come out of Asia, it's in many ways the most unique continent in the world. There's all these bizarre religions, and I would say in a lot of countries in Asia are becoming very effeminate.
See, that's where we need that good doctrine coming in from Pastor Stuckey, where he's helping people understand the importance of being manly, of being masculine, exuding strength, and being bold and having distinct gender roles. Obviously, America's leading the way in trying to confuse that, causing all kinds of situations that are almost unthinkable. All kinds of headlines about just crazy things like woman in prison gets pregnant. And you're just like, what are you talking about? Or just the headlines that are coming out from America today. I don't even want to say some of them because they're just so perverted and so disgusting.
It's evil.
But it's like incest and sodomy and just all kinds of gender bending, weird stuff. People getting all kinds of surgeries and doing all kinds of mutilation to their body. And obviously, since you said the Philippines love America and a lot of people love America, it's affecting these people. And, without a real American over there preaching like what the Bible says, I could see how a lot of people could fall for the propaganda and the information that's going out there. And so it's important, I believe, for people like you and other Americans and other evangelists to go out there and give a different representation of what America's like, what biblical Christianity is supposed to be like. The Apostle Paul is also invading the culture of the Grecians and really putting their culture to the test, saying things that were very countercultural, and that caused him a lot of problems. I mean, he really turned the world upside down, is what the Bible says. He didn't go in there trying to make friends with the world, but was going to preach whatever the Bible says, popular or unpopular. And, I hope that that's the testimony of our evangelists or anybody that's going out there, that they're turning the world upside down, that they're not acquiescing to, whatever is going on.
One verse to think about, Paul speaks about, thou hast fully known my doctrine. And so the goal is not just to get people saved, but spread the true doctrine. And, one story that might help people understand this, when I got saved in college, obviously I lived in college, people were dressed inappropriately. I grew up very conservative, but I'm still brainwashed by the world. And I remember when I realized as an independent fundamental Baptist, I'm looking at these names of these famous preachers, and I was going online, and I remember the first sermon I listened to by Jack Hyles, and I was going through this long list, and I was like, what sermon title is the most interesting to me? And the sermon I listened to was Many Skirts in Light of the Bible. And I remember I listened to that sermon, and I thought it was out there when I heard the sermon, because, of course, my eyes every day are seeing women in miniskirts, and I thought it was a little bit over the top. But, of course, now I wouldn't think that. But what takes place is you need to hear that preaching, and you get unbrainwashed. And so if you don't have that preaching that goes against what the world is teaching, people are just going to believe what is common, and they're going to think that that's normal because they get desensitized to what they're seeing.
Yeah, and I think that it's important for us to challenge people's worldview. That's part of even why we have the show, is to go out there and try to talk about popular things, culture, things that are happening, but bring our Baptist bias with us. And, of course, some of the things we say or do or the way we live our lives is going to seem countercultural. It could even be offensive to some people. We've made documentaries that I'm sure the shock factor is pretty high when we talk about things like the sodomite deception or LGBT terrorists. But, a lot of people, their initial reaction sometimes isn't right. But then over time, they kind of start that's actually what the Bible says. I know for me personally, when I first heard the reprobate doctrine, I didn't necessarily, I definitely agreed with the doctrine, but I struggled to apply that to all homosexuals. I kind of thought I don't know if that's really true. And now, of course, I don't have any doubt in that. But at the time, I definitely wasn't really ready to just accept that or understand that fully from the Bible. It took me a little bit of time to kind of grow and learn that. But I think it's important to expose people to things that they may not like or get offended. I mean, was there a time, Ben, when you heard a sermon and you were kind of offended, but then later you kind of realized hey, that's actually right?
Yeah, for sure. I'm not ashamed to admit that.
Is it about McDonald's?
Well, you step on my toes when you preach on McDonald's and Indian food and some of the foods that I enjoy, but that's okay.
You still haven't come to the knowledge of the truth on that, though, have you?
Well, you'll have to keep working on me.
Okay.
But all kidding aside, I feel like for a lot of Christians, when they hear that first ever sermon, hard preaching style against the faggots or against, whatever group they might have some sympathetic feelings for, the initial reaction might be negative at first, but I feel like as we get closer and closer to the end times, and as the society that we're all living in right now is getting more and more wicked and degenerate and deviant, it's almost like our preaching just doesn't sound as radical anymore. I mean, when you have these faggots defiling kids at public school libraries across the country, it doesn't seem so radical to believe that they're all pedophiles and that they should all be put to death according to Leviticus 20:13. So I just think it's amazing.
How do you feel about that?
I just think it's amazing.
Do you agree with that?
No, I definitely agree with that. And I just think it's amazing that we're being accused by some folks, including one in the chat room, of not having very much grace and not having very much love. Well, why don't you go tell that to all the converts that are coming out of Pastor Stuckey's church who got saved and will be in heaven for all of eternity because he took the time to go give that person the gospel. Why don't you tell that to the people that got saved at the mission trip that Pastor Shelley put on? I'll show you some grace. It's called soul winning. It's called giving people the gospel of Jesus Christ while you virtue signal about how much you love homos. These pastors that you think are hateful are getting people saved.
Well, and of course, some people don't understand that even in soul winning scenarios, you have to explain the reprobate doctrine for them to get saved. I've had people saying, well, I can't believe child molesters and these predators are going to go to heaven. And, it's well, they're not. I mean, they hate God, they hate the Lord Jesus Christ, and they've been given over to a reprobate mind. And of course, we're all sinners. We all deserve hell. And Jesus truly paid for the sins of every person. But there are some people that have been given over and are a manifestation of God's wrath on this earth. And the Bible says that you shouldn't love literally every single person. God doesn't love literally every single person. You know, Joe Biden. Joe Biden is not a person that I'm praying for is good or wishing him well. He's a minister of the devil who's promoting transgenderism, promoting abortion, promoting basically every satanic doctrine you can imagine, and even trying to blaspheme Easter and the Lord Jesus Christ. And so, yeah, he's a reprobate, and I have no problem, calling him out or saying, praying an imprecatory prayer for him or encouraging other people to do so. But, it's funny to me, I'm labeled a hate preacher because I hate 5% of the population, but it's like I love 95%. Why wouldn't I be called a love preacher if I love 95% of the population? And many of these people, they act like they love everybody, but that's not true. Nobody loves everyone. And I would argue that the leftists and the Democrats and a lot of these propagandists, they literally love no one. They love less than 5%
They're
of the population.
Worst people.
Have you experienced that, Pastor Stuckey, where you have to give someone like information about the reprobate doctrine or talk about that topic when soul winning?
Yeah, I do have a few stories about that. Let me just quickly give you a verse that makes me think about this, where I preached some sermons on it, where knowest thou not yet that Egypt is destroyed, where people come to Pharaoh and they're just like, have you not figured it out? And one good thing about the world becoming so crazy is there are definitely people that are crossing over that thought we were extreme. And now they're like, okay, I get it. They're a little bit late to the party. It took them to the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th plague or whatever. But they're like, yeah, I see the world is insane. They think that the preaching, the preachers that were, they thought it too extreme. They're realizing that that's correct. But I have a close family member that I remember I gave them the gospel right after I got saved. And, of course, I didn't know much about the Bible. I didn't really grow up that much in church. And they were asking me questions because they had seen a lot of evil people, grown up in a big city. And they were talking to me about, what about these evil people? And I knew once you're saved, you're always saved. And they brought up like Judas Iscariot and other people. And I was like, I don't know if Judas was saved or not, but if he was saved, then he was still saved afterwards because you can't lose your salvation. Because I didn't know or understand the reprobate doctrine, and I was trying to defend eternal security. But it gives a skewed perspective where people are just like, that doesn't make sense. Because even people realize on the inside, no, a pedophile is not normal. I mean, Jeffrey Dahmer's not normal. Ted Bundy's not normal. And so, it can help people get saved. I mean, obviously, we don't bring that up unless it's necessary, because you can't just throw the whole kitchen sink at people. You're going to have a very long gospel presentation. But yeah, there are times when, it's necessary to kind of talk about it a little bit. And somebody might even bring it up that is, a normal person wondering about it because maybe they realize that there's something wrong with those people. So there are times that, I've experienced where you have to explain it to them and it makes make sense.
I mean, at least in America, I feel like often people are bringing it up. I'm not trying to at all. I'm trying to explain how Jesus died on the cross for our sins, and they're bringing up these issues, and you have to talk about it. And we had a guest recently, Alex Rosen, was on the show not that long ago, and he was kind of saying like it's sad that Islam seems to be more right on some of these issues, because he goes out there and catches child predators all the time. And he's kind of sickened by how much Christians just pretend like it's not a big deal, or extending these people grace, or just like loving the pedophile who's just hurting and molesting children and doing the worst things imaginable. And to him, he's just thinking like, what's wrong with this religion that's just like loving the most satanic, evil freaks imaginable? Like, and they have just a perverted view of who Jesus is. They think that Jesus would just love and tolerate everything. They forget the fact that Jesus literally made a scourge of a cord of whips, or a whip of cords, and he walked into the temple and was literally beating people out of the temple for buying and selling in the house of God. So I'm supposed to believe that Jesus Christ, who was whipping and beating people out of the house of God for buying and selling in the house of God, would go and hang out with child molesters? Like, that's like insane.
He literally said that it would be better for child offenders to put a millstone about their neck, or for there to be a millstone about their neck, or for them to be drowned in the depths of the sea.
Yeah, he said if a man curses father and mother, let him die the death. And sometimes people twist the passage about the woman caught in adultery. But if we take him at his word, what did Jesus say? He that is without sin, cast the first stone. Like, he didn't say, like, let's all give her a hug and tell her how sweet she is. He literally said to stone her to death. He just put a caveat on it that's saying, like, hey, he that is among you that is without sin. It's like, okay, sure. Obviously, we realize that, no one was sinless. And so he's the only one that could rightfully judge in that particular situation when it comes to going outside of human authority. But, in that